my name is Karla Hooper, and I also go via the public persona of Earth Girl, which is what I do a lot of my environmental and health and waste reduction education to the world. So I live in Western Australia. I did go on a bit of an adventure when I left university and I started my professional career. I moved to the top of Australia in Darwin, the Northern Territory. So I spent a little bit of time there for a few years, and I worked offshore and, you know, bought a house, did all those things that a professional career allows you to do. But then I quit that job and decided to learn about a sustainable form of transportation, which for me was camels. So I quit my job and I travelled around Australia, like really remote Australia, learning all about camels and catching them from the wild and working as a cameleer, because Australia actually has the largest population of wild camels in the world. And then I ended up back in Perth via a series of events. So although I've lived most of my life in Perth, I've had a few adventures around Australia and in different areas as well. A lot of Australians don't know that we have a lot of wild camels. But when Australia was first settled and they were exploring, because so much of inner Australia is desert, extreme desert, they imported camels and cameleers. And that is what opened up Central Australia. That's how they explored it. And then the camels carried all of the railway tracks to create the Garn Railway, which goes through the centre, or the guts of Australia from north to south. And yeah, like we have a huge camel history, really. So I have had an obsession and a passion for finding solutions to how to live more sustainably on the earth since I was about 22. Like, I went to university and I studied health and environment, environmental issues and environmental science. So I was there for 4.5 years, and during that time I was just bombarded with the issues the world is facing. But I also witnessed so many contradictions. You know, I was at a university where it was really well known for its environmental studies and leadership, but we weren't necessarily walking our talk. And there was so much attention on problem, but no one was really telling me what the solutions were. So as I got educated, I was like, okay, I understand there's problems. I don't want to contribute towards them, but I just want to focus on the solutions. So I sort of rewired my brain to be problem in, solution out. And around the same time that I started university, my spiritual journey started as well. So I was really aware that where my focus goes, my energy goes. So I just didn't want to put any more focus into problems, and I really wanted to put all of my energy and attention into solutions. So that built up instead. So I went on a little bit of a journey and adventure. So I finished university and I went and worked in the mining, oil and gas industry. So I was very much someone who didn't want to point the finger from the outside at industry and different things. I really wanted to get an inside knowledge so that I could talk from experience. And I had an amazing job. It was really wonderful. I worked as a health specialist and I regularly worked offshore, often the only female. And I was there for about 3 years, and then I was offshore one day and I was like, I love this job, it's wonderful, but it's not really feeding my soul. Like, how can I get back to my sustainability roots and passion? And that's when someone gave me a book about a lady named Robin Davidson who trekked across Australia with camels. And I was like, oh, well, there's my solution to sustainable transportation. And I really wanted to travel Australia, and I chose Australia specifically, not the world, because I had a dog that I'd had since I was 18 and I didn't want to leave her behind. So by traveling Australia, I could put her in the car with me. And yeah, so I wanted to travel with a purpose. So I was like, okay, well, camels is my purpose. So I resigned from my job and I shaved my head and I rented out my house and I threw my dog in the car, and then we travelled around Australia for 2 years. So catching camels from the wild, working as a cameleer in Central Australia. And then I came back to Perth to build a gypsy wagon with my dad, with the intention of towing that back to Alice Springs or Central Australia, which is where I'd left my camels that I'd caught from the wild. But the universe just had other plans for me. So I've never left Perth since I came back in 2012. And through a whole series of events, I ended up in a small country town near Perth, and I took on the job as the environmental officer for the local shire. And via that job, the first thing that I did is implement curbside recycling bins, because that town didn't have any recycling collection. So I was like, right, I'll get onto that. And I was also reviewing a landfill application at the same time. So via that role, I started looking at the waste industry. And here in Australia, we have a really, really convenient waste system where our rubbish and our recycling goes in wheelie bins, which we roll out onto the curb out front of our house once a week or once a fortnight, and then it gets collected and then you don't need to think about it again. But via my role, I started going down the rabbit hole of looking at the waste industry. And the more I learned, the more concerned I became. And the more I decided the solution was just not to contribute to that. And the more I looked at waste, the more I realised that all my sustainable living interests could all be tied into waste. And so I started then focusing my life around waste reduction. So I've lived what I term a low waste lifestyle since 2013, where I put my rubbish and recycling bin out once a year, if that, and the contents are going significantly down all the time. And so I formed the belief that the one thing that humanity can do that's within our power to return balance and respect to the earth is waste reduction. So that's what I'm now educating on, is how to live a low waste lifestyle. And that's really my message that comes along with Earth Girl as well. And my camel journey, so I've got camels to go trekking in the wild. That hasn't eventuated yet, but I do have a camel in Perth, but she doesn't live with me. She lives on a retreat on a property further out in the country. But I have 2 Clydesdale horses that live at home with me. So once my business gets established and is sustainable, then I want to start doing treks with the animals, with the horses and the camels. And that will be something that I will gift to people. Like, that's purely to reconnect them with the earth, sleep under the stars, just for 1 to 2 weeks at a time. And that's really what my soul wants to do, you know. So that's a journey that I'm working towards. So I can't wait for the day to do my first trek and finish the journey that I started 9 years ago. And I make everything from scratch. So that's really the main thing. So I make the food at home from Whole Foods. I have an amazing machine called a Thermomix that helps me do, like, it makes life heaps easier making things from scratch. And I make all my own soaps and natural personal care products and cleaning products. I've been on the journey of finding recipes for years. Like, I really think a big thing about the way that I live is it's nothing new. It's what a lot of our grandparents did, but out of necessity, not out of choice. And I think that's what makes me a little bit different. But what I've found is a lot of that information hasn't been passed down as far as the simplicity of the solutions. If you look on the internet, or even if you get you know, recipe books on how to make your own. I've personally found that there is so much information that's just overcomplicated and unnecessary. And when you're making everything from scratch in your life, for me, it has to be convenient, it has to be simple, and it has to work, it has to be effective. So a lot of my journey has been like overcoming those barriers and being like, okay, how can I do this but get the absolute simplest recipe and the simplest methodology to get the result that I want? So I've got to a point now where I've got a lot of my base ingredients ready, and what I'm doing is I'm writing what I've termed a life Bible, and writing all of that down and recording it. I'm turning it into online courses as well, so that all the information is documented. Really, a lot of that is for me, so that I have a reference document for my life, but I'm sharing it with the world because it needs to be passed down. You know, we need to start recording this information, and I don't expect other people to spend years researching, and like my life is researching and experimenting, but I'm blessed because I have the time to do that. And I understand that people's most valuable resource is their time, and it's something that, you know, most people don't have a lot of. So I'm hoping to make the journey a whole heap easier for people who are interested in this way of life. An internal drive to make a difference for ever. For a really long time, I've had something driving in me. And well, really in my early 20s, sort of at the start of my awakening journey and my spiritual journey, I handed my life over to something greater than me. And I said, right, your will, not mine. You guide me. I want to be of service to humanity, to the earth, you know, but you tell me how. And really, that's a journey that I've been on ever since. I live life via my intuition. It's been a really, really critical part of my journey to decondition myself from what I've been told, and to instead tune into what feels right internally, to determine, like, it's like my cells of my body know truth. And I'm very, like, I learned early on in the piece that, you know, telling people what to do and thinking that I know best is what switches people off. And I'm so glad I got that realization early. And I have formed the opinion that the best way to create change or inspire change is simply to live your life doing your thing, live and breathe it, and it just infuses out. Before I started the Earth Girl journey and sharing via that means, I truly don't think I ever talked about waste or waste reduction, but I lived it. And I didn't even know then that that was going to be my message to the world. But so often I would have people come to me and say, Karla, I just can't think of waste the same anymore. You've completely changed my mind. And I was like, what do you mean? We've never talked about waste together. Like, it really was so interesting. And I'm a big believer of that, you know, just live and breathe what you believe to be true, and the rest sort of, you know, catches on. So I kind of live my life via that. Ask for guidance without a doubt. So it's the simplest, most effective thing to do, and it is the easiest to forget. You know, when we're really like in a hole or in a low patch or whatever, or just struggling with whatever it might be, it's so easy to sit in that. And I personally have found that can shift almost instantly when I say, please help me, please guide me. And my belief is that we have guides that are behind the scenes helping us, but often they can't step in unless they are invited. So the simplest thing is to ask. And, you know, like, I think of us as, I think of each human as an onion with many, many, many layers. And you can't get to the core without undressing each one. And there's a process and a system that you have to go through. And the only way that you can do that is to work directly with your higher self and your guides to be directed what's next. And what I've personally found on my journey is, you know, a book will catch my attention and that will hold the next key. Or I'll be in a conversation and hear about, I don't know, a healer or a person that I think, oh gosh, I really need to go and see them. And so I'll take that next step and that will get rid of another layer. Or, you know, emotional freedom technique, I use that a lot. So there's a lot of different ways of starting or progressing along the journey, but I'm like, it's got to be stepping stones. You can't do it by yourself, and you don't have to do it by yourself. I think that's the most important thing, is we have people behind the scenes, or, you know, maybe not people, but we have guides behind the scenes that are helping us out each step of the way to hold our hands. Yeah.